My name is Daniel, and this happened in March of 2023 when I was 26 years old. My sister planned the whole thing as a birthday surprise. She booked an escape room for the four of us, me, her, and two of our close friends, Marcus and Lena, on a Saturday night in late winter. The kind of night where it gets dark early, and the cold keeps most people inside. She'd been talking about doing this for months, and I'd always blown it off, so she just went ahead and booked it without asking. The venue was called Lockton. It was on the lower level of an old building downtown, the kind of place that used to be something else entirely before it got renovated. A print shop, maybe, or a storage facility. You could still feel the original bones of the building underneath all the decorative horror props. The walls were thick. The ceilings were low. The hallways between the rooms were narrow in a way that felt less designed and more like they'd always been that way. We checked in at the front desk. A guy about my age handed us a waiver and gave us the rundown in a flat, rehearsed tone. The room we'd booked was called the Killer's House. Premise was simple. A serial killer had been active in the area, we were trapped in his home, and we had 60 minutes to find evidence of his identity and escape before he returned. Standard stuff. He told us there would be one live actor inside the room, someone playing the role of a surviving witness, who might interact with us, stay in character, and occasionally help us or unsettle us. He said not to touch the actor and not to panic if things got uncomfortable. All part of the experience. We went in. The set design was legitimately impressive. Dim lighting, period furniture, a smell that was somewhere between dust and something chemical that I couldn't name. There were locked boxes everywhere, coded locks on cabinets, papers scattered around with clues written on them. We split up immediately. Marcus and Lena started working on a puzzle near the door. My sister found a locked briefcase under a side table. I started moving through the back half of the room. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the far corner, almost completely still. Tall, 6'2", maybe more. Wearing a torn gray hoodie with the hood pulled up, hands loose at his sides. His face was covered by a plain white mask, the kind with no expression, no features, just flat white plastic. I assumed immediately that this was the actor. The guy at the desk had warned us about him, and this matched the aesthetic of the room perfectly. I walked toward him and said something like, "Hey, we just got here, what can you tell us?" The kind of thing you'd say to an escape room actor. He said nothing. Didn't move. Didn't turn his head. Just stood there. I figured he was playing the silent, unsettling type. I moved on. For the next 10 minutes I kept glancing back at him between puzzles. He never changed position. His arms never moved. His head never turned. I started to notice something that I kept trying to dismiss. I couldn't see him breathing. Not the rise and fall of his chest, not any visible movement at all. I told myself the lighting was too low, that the hoodie was too thick, that I was just in my head. Then Lena called out from across the room. She'd found a key inside a hollowed-out book, and was asking if anyone knew what it opened. I turned to help her. We worked through the puzzle together for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. When I looked back at the corner, he was gone. No door near that corner. I walked over and checked the wall, solid. No seam, no handle, no hidden panel. The nearest exit was the main door we'd come in through, which was on the opposite side of the room and in full view of all of us. Nobody had come through it. I mentioned it to Marcus. He shrugged and said the actor probably had a staff exit we hadn't spotted. That made sense. I let it go. We finished the room with about 4 minutes left on the clock. I felt good. It was a well-designed room, the puzzles were satisfying, and by the end the weird thing in the corner had mostly faded from my mind. We came back out into the lobby laughing, talking over each other about which part we'd found hardest. I stopped at the desk to ask about the actor. I genuinely wanted to compliment him. Staying that still for that long was impressive, and the disappearing trick was a good bit. I asked the guy behind the desk who the actor in the white mask was. He looked at me with a confused expression and said, "What actor?" I described what I'd seen. The hoodie, the mask, the corner, the stillness. He pulled up something on his screen and then looked back at me slowly. He said that for our session, the live actor component had been removed. The person who usually played that role had called in sick that afternoon. Our room had run without any staff inside it. I remember the exact feeling that moved through me when he said that. It wasn't fear right away. It was more like the floor had shifted slightly under my feet. He asked if we'd be willing to wait a moment. Then he walked into a back room and came out 2 minutes later with his phone. He'd pulled up the security camera feed for our room. We watched it together, me, my sister, Marcus, and Lena standing around a small desk in the lobby while the footage played. You could see all 4 of us moving around the room clearly. The camera angle was wide enough to capture most of the space. The corner where I had watched a man stand completely still for the better part of 15 minutes was empty. Empty in every single frame. My sister made a sound I'd never heard her make before. Marcus kept saying wait, go back every few seconds. I just stood there. The desk guy didn't offer an explanation. He didn't try to tell us it was a trick, or a second camera, or a mirror. He just looked at the footage the same way we did, and said nothing for a long time. He gave us a full refund without us asking. He asked us to have a good night. He said it in the tone of someone who wanted the conversation to be over. We drove home mostly in silence. I haven't been back to an escape room since. I've thought about what I saw, or what I thought I saw, probably more than I should. I've tried to come up with every rational explanation. A reflection. A prop I mistook for a person. A trick of the lighting. But I keep coming back to one thing I can't explain away. When I walked up to him and spoke, I was close. Maybe 4 feet away. And I remember very clearly thinking, even in that moment, that something about him didn't look quite right. That the stillness was too complete. That the mask was too flat. I thought it at the time and pushed it away. I shouldn't have. My name is Ryan. I'm a software engineer. I say that only because I want you to understand the kind of person I am before I tell you what happened, someone who defaults to logic, who looks for the rational explanation first, who is genuinely skeptical about most things. I don't scare easily and I don't dramatize. What I'm about to describe is exactly what happened, as accurately as I can remember it. This was a company team building event in the fall of 2022. My manager booked an escape room for our team, 8 of us total, at a venue called The Vault, located in a converted warehouse on the eastern edge of the city. The building was old. Not charmingly old. Just old, the kind of structure that's been added to and modified so many times over the decades that it doesn't have a coherent identity anymore. There were original brick walls next to cheap drywall partitions. Industrial ceiling fixtures next to decorative ones. You could feel the different eras of the building layered on top of each other. The room we were assigned was called the laboratory. The scenario involved a missing scientist, a fictional viral outbreak, and a 60-minute window to escape before a simulated quarantine lockdown. Standard escape room logic. We'd been given a brief by a staff member who seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the premise and handed us each a small UV flashlight as part of the experience. We went in joking around, relaxed, the way you do when it's a work thing and everyone's pretending to be more excited than they actually are. The room was well put together. Lab tables, prop equipment, locked storage units, a fake computer terminal with a puzzle on the screen. We split into smaller groups and started working. The first 20 minutes went smoothly. We solved 2 of the main puzzles and were feeling pretty good about our chances. Then my coworker Dana pushed a large metal shelving unit out of the way to look behind it, and we all stopped talking. There was a door in the wall behind it. Not a prop door. Not one of those escape room false doors designed to look real as part of the puzzle. A real door. Old wood, clearly original to the building, slightly warped along the frame the way old doors get in buildings that have settled over decades. There was no handle on our side, just a flat surface, and a thin gap along the bottom where the door met the floor. I went to the intercom mounted near the entrance, and asked the game master if the door was part of the puzzle. There was a pause that lasted long enough to be noticeable. Then the GM's voice came through and said, "What door?" I described it. Location, what it looked like, that it was behind the shelving unit. Another pause. Then, "Don't touch it. Continue the game." I want to be clear about how strange that response was. In an escape room, everything is either a puzzle element, or clearly marked as off-limits with a sign or tape. You don't tell someone to just don't touch it about a prop without explanation. That's not how these venues work. The GM's voice had also shifted slightly, less scripted, more careful. We kept playing, but I couldn't stop thinking about the door. About 10 minutes later I walked back over to it, and crouched down. I pressed my hand flat against the wood near the bottom. It was cold. Noticeably colder than the surrounding wall. And there was a draft coming through the gap. Not a faint one. A real, steady movement of air from the other side. I put my eye to the gap. There was a faint glow on the other side, pale, ambient, like natural light coming through a window somewhere below. And about 6 inches from the bottom of the door, I could make out the edge of a step. The top of a staircase going down. I stood up and told the group what I'd seen. Before anyone could respond, the game master's voice cut through the speakers, no longer in character, no longer using the scenario framing, and said flatly that the session was over. Please make your way to the exit. We still had 18 minutes on the clock. We filed back into the lobby. 2 people were there who hadn't been present when we arrived, a man and a woman, both in ordinary clothing, no uniforms or name tags. They were speaking quietly with the venue manager near the front desk. As soon as we came through the door, the manager looked up and walked over to us. He was calm but clearly moving with purpose. He thanked us for coming, apologized for the early end, and said there had been a technical issue with the room. He offered us a full refund and said we'd receive a voucher for a future visit. When one of my coworkers asked what the issue was, he said something vague about a ventilation problem and moved the conversation along. The 2 people in plain clothes never spoke to us. They watched us leave. I looked up the building afterward. It had been a residential structure in the early 20th century, a boarding house that operated for several decades before the area was rezoned for commercial and industrial use. City property records show the original structure had a basement level. I filed a public records request for the building's current floor plan, the one submitted with the escape room's occupancy permit. The basement is not on it. I don't know what was down those stairs. I don't know who those 2 people were or why they were there. I don't know why the GM's voice changed the moment I described that door, or why they ended our session with almost a third of our time remaining. What I know is that the draft was real. The cold was real. The step I saw through that gap was real. And someone, at some point, decided that door needed to be hidden behind a shelving unit. My name is Jess. This happened in the summer of 2022, and I've only told it to a small number of people since then because every time I do, I can see them trying to find the simple explanation. I've already found every simple explanation. None of them hold up. 5 of us went. Me, my friend Mara, Kayla, Sophie, and Sophie's younger sister Britt, who was visiting for the week. All women, all mid-20s, all looking for something to do on a Friday night that wasn't just sitting at a bar. Mara had been suggesting escape rooms for months. We finally said yes. The venue was called Exit Strategy. It was in a newer part of town, well-lit, clean, the kind of place with good Yelp reviews and a friendly logo. Nothing about it felt off walking in. The woman at the front desk was cheerful and efficient. She took my name for the booking, just my last name, Chen, and got us checked in without any issues. We didn't fill out forms with our individual names. We didn't introduce ourselves to any staff. The booking was one reservation under one name. The room was a haunted house scenario. The premise was that we were paranormal investigators sent to document activity in an abandoned property. The game master would communicate with us through a speaker and microphone system. They could hear us and speak to us, watch through cameras, give hints, set the atmosphere. We'd done a room with this setup before at a different venue. It's a common format. We went in. The room was dark, theatrical, well decorated. Candles that were actually LED bulbs, old furniture with hidden compartments, fog from a machine near the floor. For the first 20 minutes everything felt completely normal. The GM's voice came through a few times, once to give us a gentle nudge when we were stuck, once to add some theatrical commentary about a presence in the room as part of the atmosphere. It all felt scripted, produced, safe. Then the voice said, "Nice work, Mara. You're almost through the first section." Mara turned and looked at me immediately. The same thought was on both our faces. We hadn't introduced ourselves. Not to the front desk. Not to each other within earshot of any staff. Mara's name was not on the booking. There was no way, through any normal channel, for the GM to know which one of us was Mara. I told myself it was coincidence. That he'd guessed, or misheard something one of us said. I kept moving. About 3 minutes later, the voice came through again. It said, "Kayla, the answer you're looking for is near the window on your left." The room went quiet. Kayla is not a common name. There was no version of coincidence or educated guessing that produced Kayla. She hadn't said her name once since we'd arrived. She was standing completely still, staring at the speaker mounted in the corner of the room. None of us moved for a moment. Then the voice said, "Sophie? You look exhausted. Rough week?" Sophie made a sound I had never heard from her before, and have not heard since. It wasn't fear exactly. It was closer to the sound a person makes when something confirms what they were already afraid of. Sophie had been dealing with a serious family situation for the past several days. She hadn't been sleeping. She had told me in a brief text earlier that week, and she mentioned it to Mara in person the night before. She had not told Britt. She had absolutely not told anyone at an escape room venue. I hit the emergency exit button on the wall before anyone else moved. The door opened within seconds. A staff member, young woman, probably 19 or 20, was standing just outside. She looked startled by how we came out. Not in a polished, "this is part of the show" way. In a genuine way. Like she'd been standing in a quiet hallway and 5 people had suddenly burst through a door looking shaken. I asked her directly, "Who is on the microphone right now, and how do they know our names?" She looked confused. She said that there was no game master assigned to our room that evening. The venue was short-staffed. Our room was running on an automated system, pre-recorded audio cues triggered by motion sensors placed at key points in the room. There was no live voice. No one watching us on cameras. No person on the other end of a microphone. I told her exactly what we'd heard. The names. All 3 of them. What was said to Sophie? Her expression changed. Not dramatically, she didn't go pale or step back. But something in her face closed off, the way people look when they're working out what they're allowed to say. She excused herself and went to find the manager. We stood in the hallway for 15 minutes. Britt kept saying there had to be a logical explanation. Kayla didn't say anything. Sophie sat on a bench near the wall with her arms crossed and stared at the floor. The manager came out. He was professional, measured, clearly experienced at de-escalating uncomfortable situations. He told us there had been a technical error, that a game master overseeing a different room had somehow had his audio feed cross into our room's speaker system by mistake. A wiring issue. Very unusual, very sorry, full refund, free visit for all 5 of us. He delivered it smoothly. I could tell he'd landed on an explanation and committed to it. But I kept thinking about one thing on the drive home, and I still think about it now. If that explanation were true, if a real, live game master from another room had somehow had his voice fed into our speakers, then that person was sitting somewhere in that building, watching a camera feed, and he knew our names. Not my last name from the booking. Our actual first names. All of them. Including Sophie's. Including what Sophie had been going through that week. That person was never identified. We were never told who it was. The manager moved us out of the building efficiently, and the conversation ended. Exit Strategy closed down about 6 months later. Their social media stopped posting without any announcement. The website redirected to a blank page. I drove past the building once and the windows were dark. I have no idea what happened in that room. I just know that whoever was on the other end of that microphone wasn't a game master running the wrong audio feed. They knew too much for that. And they were watching us the whole time.